Hey, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday live call about retirement, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Very happy to see all of you today. We are live on both Facebook and on LinkedIn. So very excited to be here with you on what is a beautiful Wednesday where I am, and I hope is a beautiful Wednesday where all of you are as well. My guest today is David Blanchett. Hi, David. David is head of retirement research. I believe I got that title right, but I might not. He has many, many, many letters after his name at Morningstar. He is a CFP, but also a CFA. He's a PhD, and he does a lot of fascinating research that I tend to tune into about retirement and how we're handling this challenge of retirement that is out in front of all of us. So, David, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do at Morningstar day to day.
Sure. So my primary job is we actually have like a robo advice tool that works for defined contribution plans. There's like 1.6 million participants, about $65 billion. I help with that. So I help figure out, how do you invest someone's money, how much you should save for retirement. And then we also have a bunch of other tools that are used in different places that I help with too. So different things all about retirement financial planning.
I think a lot of people think of Morningstar still as the firm that gives stars to mutual funds, but in fact, it's much more than that these days, right?
That's right. So we do still give stars to mutual funds. Let's not forget that. But we do a lot. I mean, Morningstar is a company. We actually have over $1 billion in revenue. We're kind of just this growing organization in the investment space that, is trying to provide kind of independent advice and guidance on helping participants accomplish goals. So, yeah.
Nice. How have you seen people reacting to coronavirus in terms of, I'm not talking emotionally. Maybe I am talking emotionally in terms of their investments, how they are, how they're dealing with the fact that, we are now almost 4 months into this.
Yeah, I can't speak to the emotional or the medical stuff at all. I'm the wrong guy for that. But, when it comes to the investment stuff, there's been a lot of kind of research that's been put out looking at how people responded. And, for the most part, people have stayed the course. They haven't kind of overreacted. But, a few folks have. We saw a lot of people, especially I think older individuals closer to retirement and retirement who have reacted and kind of moved into cash given all the volatility. And that can make sense to do. But I think that this is kind of the time where you ask yourselves, like, do I have a good strategy? Does this make sense? And, how do I react given all the changes going on right now?
It's interesting because we're having this conversation on yet another volatile day in the market. And gosh, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I know you've been doing it a while as well. And I remember when volatility was 100 points. Right now, volatility is multiple hundreds of points, and those big numbers can get very, very frightening. Let me just acknowledge we've got people watching. We've got people already starting to say hello, which is fantastic. The folks from She Speaks are regulars here in Dayspring. If they have questions, I just want to invite you all who are watching to ask them. David is a wonderful resource, and we'll both put our hats on and answer them for you. So please feel free to continue to weigh in. These moves that you're seeing people make, do you get a sense of whether they are emotional moves or whether they're moves that people might be making because they've figured out that they're off their plan for whatever reason?
So, I mean, it's obviously both. I think that it's mostly emotional, right? Because the kind of the volatility of changes we're seeing at a quarterly level is more what you see on an annual basis. So I think that a lot of people don't have the right portfolio. So you're saving for retirement and you're behind. You might say, "Oh, I'm going to invest aggressively. I'm going to make that up with investing in stocks." And then things like this happen. You're further behind. So I think that we have these events that happen every like 6 to 10 years, and people say, "Hey, wait a minute, does my strategy make sense? And a few folks are asking that question and saying, hey, I should pay back on risk because I have enough money to accomplish my goal. I think a lot of folks that are doing this are just scared of what could happen next and what it means for their retirement.
I was doing some research into this earlier in the cycle of the pandemic and learning a lot about recency bias. The fact that when we have a day like this in the market, what behavioral economists have learned is that we expect that the same thing is going to happen again and again and again. And in fact, that's where intuition comes from, right? Where we see the same things happen and we get adjusted to these patterns and then we expect them, but it's not always the wise move.
Right. I mean, I think I haven't seen too much research that says that the average person makes good choices when it comes to investing, right? I think that what's really interesting is like when the markets go down, they're actually like more attractive to buy, right? But how we respond to market declines is the exact opposite. So it's harder for us emotionally to actually get more aggressive in times of volatility when that's when it makes the most sense. And so I think that a lot of the traits that kept humans alive 1,000 years ago don't necessarily make us very good investors today.
You mentioned older investors and those investors close to retirement. And I just want to acknowledge, I see your questions coming in and I will start getting to them in just a minute. Why older investors? Why do you think the older investors are the ones who are taking action, and why are you worried about them? And then as a follow-up, what would you like to see them do instead?
So many questions. So I think the reason why they're reacting is because retirement is all of a sudden very real, right? If you ask a 35-year-old, you've got this money, it's for retirement. But I think that people, when they figure out how much they need, how much they can spend, the thought of losing that it becomes very emotional as you get closer to retirement. And so, what I would actually recommend is that you have someone do it for you, and that could be just a balanced fund at Vanguard. It could be a target date fund at your employer. It could be a financial advisor. There's lots of options, but just don't do it yourself. Right. And the problem, though, is the opposite is what happens. And so as people get older, they're actually more likely to kind of do things themselves, which is the opposite of what I'd like to see.
People think that doing it themselves is cheaper than doing it, than having somebody do it for them. That's not always the case if you choose one of those solutions that you were talking about, like a balanced fund or a target date fund or a robo-advisor, or even, there are financial advisors who will work by the hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are incredibly expensive options. There's very cheap options. If you open up an account at Vanguard, Schwab, Fidelity, and buy a balanced index fund, that's a really good way to get access to a high quality, low cost investment.
Ellen is wondering, in general, what changes should we consider for our retirement plans given COVID, or is this the time to stay the course?
So great question. It's always time to stay the course, right? I think that there's a few things going on right now, and so my wife's parents are close to retirement. My parents have already retired, but my father-in-law was interested in possibly working when he retired in a year or two. And one thing I've told him is like it might actually be really hard right now to pivot to a new career given unemployment we have today. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that a lot of people have portfolio balances that have gone down based upon what's happened in the markets. And so what you thought you could get out of your portfolio is less than it used to be. And so the one thing that you can really do to help your retirement outcome is to work longer. And I know that that's not like the thing people want to hear, but like right now with all that's going on, that's a variable that if you can control it. Right. If you can just add on a year or two extra of working, it gives you more options in case interest rates stay low or things keep being bad in the markets.
I've been very surprised at the research, and I think some of it actually was your research that put a dollar value, or at least a percentage value, on how much of a difference it could make just to work an additional 6 months or a year. Like it's big.
It's like the silver bullet.
Right. But it's the silver bullet for a couple of reasons, right? It's not that you're just continuing to put money into your portfolio. You're not pulling money out of your portfolio, and it can still grow. So it has that amplifying effect.
right? And you can delay claiming Social Security. And to me, like, there's nothing that you can do that it kind of improves your retirement outcome more than delaying retirement. And the reverse is also true. Like, most Americans retire early, not on time. And retiring a few years early can have just this huge negative impact on your retirement lifestyle. So I know a lot of people want to retire as soon as they can, but again, just kind of holding it off for a year or two, especially right now, I think is really good advice, because it's going to be really hard to go back to work. Right, it's really hard to kind of try out retirement. Usually people do it and then they realize, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting. Well, now it's not going to be easy if you leave the workforce and say, hey, you know what, I want to go back to work again. To find the same kind of job is a lot harder today than it was 6 months or a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. As we're talking about retirement and living a long time in retirement, we're sort of talking about living longer in general. You and I had a prep call for this interview, and I asked you, when you're using a retirement calculator, when you're planning on retirement, what age should you put in that calculator? And you said 95.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's good news and bad news, right? No one wants to die when they're like 85 years old. And 95 is awesome, but it's really, really expensive. I mean, if you're a married couple, age 65 right now, right, there's almost a 50-50 chance one of you will live to age 95.
Yeah.
Right.
50,
and
50.
Almost 50-50. And so, and that's why 30 years is a really expensive period to like plan for, but that's just the reality, right? I mean, people can choose to ignore it. I mean, I'm doing some research and I find that like financial planners assume 90. That's way too aggressive. They should be using 95. And I think the key is just expectations. I wouldn't want someone to retire, and you plan, to pass away at 90 and then live to age 100, and you have this big shortfall, for those last 10 years. So everyone's different. Health conditions, lots of stuff happens, but retirement is a lot different than what it used to be 100 years ago. You really have to plan to live for a long time.
She speaks as wondering what tools you can use to help you figure out what would be, I guess she didn't say it in this way, but what would be the right age to retire based on the amount of resources that you have.
Sure. So there's, to me, like there's two different things you need to figure out. One is like how long my retirement's going to be, like based upon my health situation when I retire. The Society of Actuaries has a tool called the Longevity Illustrator that I think is really good. There's also lots of free online tools that give you some insight into how long you're going to possibly live. In terms of like the tools that do the forecast when it comes to retirement, it's kind of a mixed bag. I have an account at Vanguard, and I actually gave one of their tools a try the other day, and I was actually very disappointed. They do 100,000 simulations, which is like a huge, gigantic number, but they use historical long-term averages, and the historical yield on 10-year government bonds has been like 5%. It's like 1% right now. And so you really got to be careful when you use these tools to understand the assumptions. And if I assume I can make 5% a year on bonds versus 1%, that can have a huge impact on my perception of how much I have to save for retirement. So I've got, I think there's a lot of great tools out there that help you figure out how long your retirement might last based upon your health status. In terms of doing the forecast, I'm less up to date on what's available.
I think that the other important point, though, in what you said is, there are a lot of things that we can't predict. There are a lot of things that we really can't control. And when I've used these calculators in the past, and I've tried to figure out what numbers to put into the gains that you expect to earn, even on your stock portfolio, I think people have a very frightening tendency to overestimate what the markets are going to do over the long term.
Yeah, I don't like the calculators that like would ask someone like, how long do you think you're going to live? People aren't very good at knowing how long they're going to live. I think you need to ask someone like, are you healthy? Are you not healthy? I don't like the calculators that ask someone, what do you think stocks are going to make over the next 12 years or 20 years, whatever it is. I think that those are assumptions that like people like myself should be incorporating. So, I mean, it's fun to kind of play with them. At least people like me like to do that. But don't say to yourself, I need stocks to do 10% a year so I can retire in 3 years, and then use that as your assumption, because they're probably not going to do 10% a year.
We've got a couple of people who are noting in the comments that they're getting to be 60-ish, and they're having trouble getting work, finding work. They've stepped back, or they've been laid off, and they're having trouble. Let's talk a little bit about how do we make our nest egg last as long as we can? I mean, what if you're in the phase where you're not sure perhaps that you're going to be working again, and you want to make sure that you can have as comfortable a lifestyle as possible? What's the toolbox that you rely on to make that happen?
Well, I mean, Social Security retirement benefits are pretty spectacular. They're priced based upon interest rates and mortality that's like decades old. So it's a really good deal. But, I think that we just had a huge market event. People have to ask themselves, like, how did that make you feel? Right? If you're about to retire, do you want to have to live with that volatility and what it could mean for your income for retirement for 30 years? And if the answer to that's no, there's other options. I mean, there's other forms of guaranteed income. There's Social Security is an obvious bet. There's also things like annuities. And I think that really people save for retirement to retire. If you can't enjoy your retirement because you're freaking out about the market every day, that's not a very good retirement, right? So I think the key is to kind of understand, how much income do I have to have? How much do I have saved? And then build a strategy that kind of thinks about all these different pieces.
The idea of not enjoying your retirement, it sounds kind of out there, but I have to say, I mean, in our Her Money Facebook group, sometimes I hear from people who say, I'm scared to spend.
Right.
I'm sitting on my money. I'm not doing the things that I wanted to do because I'm afraid of it. And I think partly we are reluctant. We've been taught it's so bad to spend your principal that we're afraid to do it. So how do you deal with that? How do you advise people around that?
So, I mean, it is really, really hard, right? I think that spending down a portfolio is emotional. It's difficult to do behaviorally, but people love to spend income. You give them a paycheck and they'll blow through that thing in no time. And so I think that you need a way to automate it. And so it's not a conscious choice where you have to, go in and pull money out every month, every quarter, every year, because that is painful, right? You don't want to have to do that. And so an advisor can automate that. There's different systems that do that. But having to force yourself to take money out every 3 months, that's not a fun activity because you don't know how long you're going to live. And I see a question from Peter that says, are annuities very expensive to buy? They can be. One important point that people don't, I think, understand is that, so it's true today that the cost of annuities has increased. And so it costs more to buy a level of guaranteed income. Here's the thing, like, what's your alternative? You can go out and buy a 10-year government bond yielding 0.7%. Right. And so I think when you're making choices about how to fund your retirement, you need to look comprehensively. And some people like dismiss certain categories outright, like they won't recommend an annuity or they only use single stock portfolios. I think you got to find someone, if you're getting an advisor, it's open to everything, because it's, everyone's different and everyone needs a different strategy.
Well, can we just take a step back here? Because Rachel followed that up with a question just about, please tell us more. And I think a simple explainer on why. So an annuity is an insurance product. It's not a typical investment product, although some are insurance products with investments built in. Right. But the way that I've learned to understand it is, from the simplest perspective, you're taking a chunk of money and you're essentially buying a paycheck. And because you're pooling your risk with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other people, the insurance company can pay you a little bit more than they might be paying for that bond. Is that, I mean, you're the CFP. Did I just blow that? No,
you did a great job. I mean, I would have probably made it even more complicated, but no, that's, I mean, I actually don't like to use the A word because people have these emotions with it. I like to call them personal pensions, right? So what you're doing Some people have defined benefit plans. I'll probably never see one, but they're pretty awesome, right? Like, they guarantee you income for life. Like now we're all saving in this thing called a 401k, and it's nice to have that personal choice, but we don't know how long we're going to live. Right. And so, like, providing that personal pension, the income ensures that you're not going to outlive what you've saved for your retirement, which is one of the biggest fears among retirees.
Yeah, and I hadn't had this sort of light bulb moment about people not wanting to spend their principal until having this conversation with you. But I do think it's really important that we teach you have to put your saving for retirement on autopilot. You have to automate it, and 401ks work because they're automated. And that's true, because if you had to make a good decision to save every time you wanted to save, you'd go out to dinner, you'd find something else to do with the money. And
Right.
what you're saying is, okay, do that for me in the last 30 years too. Take at least the money that I need to put groceries on the table and cover my housing and utilities, and don't make me reach into that nest egg and decide how much to pull out in order to get that. And I think that makes sense. We have some more questions. Let's turn to a couple of those. Marilyn wants to know, what are some strategies for saving and being financially stable while you're in that part of the curve?
Yeah, I mean, so saving is not any fun at all. I think, but to be a good saver, it requires in theory active choice or automate it. Right. I think like that's why 401ks are so powerful, because that money is gone before it hits your paycheck. Right. So anything that you can do to kind of, you have to force yourself to set it aside, but also, let's just say that you just started. You have no emergency savings. You're just, you have to make active, positive choices. You've got to ask yourself, do I really need this? Because without emergency savings, if something happens, you have to fix your car or, get a new washer and dryer, you could be paying 25% interest rates or more for that. And so it's a really good strategy is to kind of say, hey, what can I not use now? And how can I automate a way to save into a different account that I'm not going to touch?
Yeah. Getting it at that arm's length distance, I think is really, really important. A couple of late starters are wondering, is it too late to build a decent nest egg starting at age 56? Vanessa asks.
So it's never too late to start. But it will require more sacrifice, right? So and this is really more of a for the younger people out there too. But the later that you start saving for retirement, the more you're going to have to save, and when you're older, the longer you're probably going to have to work, and the less you might have when you retire. So you still have to have a go at it. I mean, I don't think you should ever say, retirement, it's too late for me. No, it's never too late, because you're going to eventually retire. And again, most people retire not out of choice. Right. They have a health issue, their spouse has a health issue, they get laid off, things happen. Right. So, retirement isn't always an active choice. So you have to prepare for it. Now, it could mean hard choices. And the choices get harder and harder the longer you wait to start saving for retirement.
I think that surprise retirement is such an important point. I wrote a column at one point about the fact that 2/3 of retirements do not happen by choice. They happen because life comes along and tells you that this is the direction that you're going to go in. And Vanessa, I would just say on that late start question, I would look really hard at the big line items in your budget. I'd look at housing, and I'd ask myself, particularly now, as it seems like remote work is going to be more and more possible, if there's a way to trim that expense or any of the other really big ticket items in order to funnel a little bit more into saving when you're getting that kind of a late start. Carolyn wondered if you have tips on savings amounts for people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, etc.
See, I know that I like Fidelity has like the people. Yeah, there's not a right number, because so we have a lot of student debt. My wife and I both have graduate school degrees, and so we are late savers because we've been focusing on paying off those loans first, right? So I think that a really important question, I think, for a lot of people is like what, and this sounds kind of funny, but what will inspire you to actually save money? Right. People that are 30 years old aren't inspired by retirement. They don't care about retirement. But if you tell them, how do your student loans make you feel? Well, I hate them. Well, then how about this? As opposed to saving for retirement, save for your student loans. And someone might say, oh, but you can earn more money if you invest in the market. But it doesn't matter because you're going to be saving more money. And so I think, to me, when you're younger, ask yourself what you care about, what will motivate you to save, and then just save whatever you can. I think that today it's really hard for a lot of people to actually save money for retirement or whatever else because everything else they have going on. So I don't really have target numbers. I think a better approach is to kind of target what you care about.
Well, I think that is such a good answer. I mean, for me, I came late to it as well, but for a very different reason. I got divorced at 40 and found myself, basically starting over when it came to saving. And I was so scared at that point. I started saving like a crazy person. So I was, very inspired to do it and was able to make up a lot of ground between just the fear and actively living below my means. And so, so I think it just, I think it's really, really good advice. Rachel points out she did start at 20. Lucky you. Everybody on this call now hates you, Rachel. No, I'm just kidding. But it's all about the habit. It really is. It really is about the habit. David, tell us in the few minutes that we've got left here, what are you working on right now? What are you researching?
I kind of have like a hodgepodge of things I'm spending time on. I am really curious. What are some of the longer term implications of the recent volatility? Like how it's going to affect longer term savings rates? Because, let's be honest, most of American savings today for retirement happen in a 401k plan. They're really important. We've made a lot of important changes to them in the last decade. We have, you're automatically enrolled, you're automatically invested in a target date fund, which is an investment that changes over time. And so to me, what I'm going to be really curious to explore is looking at participants, investors that kind of made decisions that I'm not a huge fan of in the first quarter and figure out what we can do to kind of improve those, change those. So when this will happen again, something like this will happen again, we're ready for it. And next time we can kind of reduce the people that, opt out of the plan, that change their investments, things like that.
Do you expect that we'll see that target date retirement funds really helped this time around? The fact that people were defaulted. I remember seeing after 2007, 2008, Jim Vanderhei at at EBRI, the Employee Benefits Research Institute, told me about some research that he did that spotlighted just how much risk people who were very, very close to retirement were taking. And a huge amount were 90% in stocks before that market tumble.
Right.
But since then, a lot of plans have started to automatically put people into target date funds if they don't choose another option. And I wonder if that's gonna make a difference.
So it definitely has. So, in the last month and a half of the first quarter, if you were in a brokerage account, about over 25% of participants made a change. If you were building a portfolio yourself, it was like 5%. If you were in a TDF, it was only like 2%. So they have made a huge positive impact on decisions. But what's actually interesting as well is that if you were in like a robo advice tool, it was less than 1%. And so there's something about like the personalization that I'm curious about that even, help people stay the course even more. So, but without a doubt, letting someone else do it for you in a professionally managed portfolio, help participants make better choices in the first quarter.
And Maria is pointing out that because of COVID, her employer asked her to take a salary cut and is not contributing to her retirement. Maria, we hope we see that come back. After 2008, 2009, the employer contributions did come back, and they did come back relatively quickly. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that. But in the meantime, don't take your foot off the gas if you can. Try to keep your savings rate up. David, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for being with us. If our audience wants to follow your research as it comes out, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So I have a website. It's not very good, but
I'm sure it's very good.
It's okay. It's David M as in Matthew Blanchett.com. There's a bunch of research on there they can access or and get my information as well if they've got questions. So.
Okay, and it's Blanchett with 2 T's, so that
2 T's, like Kate. like
Yeah.
Kate, but not.
Oh, well,
I'm
there
not
you
related.
go.
It's not.
So
I'm not related.
David and his cousin Kate, exactly.
Right.
So
That's
that
right. That's right.
everybody can find you. If you're looking for more information as well, please go to protectedincome.org. That's the website of the Alliance for Lifetime Income, and you can find a series of questions to ask your financial advisor about how well situated you are for retirement. I will see you back here next Wednesday. And again, David, thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you.